caused by immortals and demons, accompanying dozens of seasons, in a moment of time, outside our brothers. Brothers and sisters, I'm full of blood, and I'm ready to go home. Meet for nearly 10 years, you and I will not forget each other, the lights in the house are on, I hope my brother will return soon. Warmly welcome the Sud Federation back home. Bayman, I am very excited, and very emotional. I will meet my brothers and sisters again after a 10-month absence. Thank you for your birthday gifts. I hope the new book will satisfy you. Thank you. The ashes fell sadly. MMBNB Noah's Ark. BJ is smart lazy. I am de kun clear mayfly stay away from the heart. The screen name is so long if I draw the card again, I'll be a stupid dog. The years are gone. Flaming G. The 3 life predestined hunter. 3 uncles of Buddhism. Heartless little penguin. Loneliness reader 153014697054384536 wind blowing cloud sleeves 526 lost 2099 old waste cultivation to practice fatty chen come happy he tanzing you can contend. 4 brilliance 9 peaks Daxian Vera 0205 Jinling dry cook Fulinian 369 vast little home old fashioned unit 0 wildfire little water flower Zi Xiaochun Acridine floating clouds, cool nights, warm stars. I am not silver lazy fat late stage cancer moon demon enlightened person Xia Yu wind rises water Chi Lala. I won't pull it today. Saint immortals equal to heaven. A 126 pound handsome boy passed by 100 miles of loneliness. An old dream of an empty city. End of the world journey searching for love in the dark night. Reader 153595226580063846 The dog from the cat star upside down Shayadai. Reader 153595336361182412 Promise 1 stay away from the blue mountains. Little handsome. Welcome spring fruits and vegetables. Yankin, Xiao Dyer $Z1 third flour braised duck 3 lives Epsilon Irina 3 fried bacon with bamboo shoots only slightly the wind falls with the grass. Yankin, elegant third flower book friend 202205151245262667 The village owner married 5053 HAO12 Just be safe and happy. God Dynasty _ G June SY May 7th Xiao Yu Pomelo rice porridge. The evening wind in the mountains. X list of gods of destiny. Weapons 9 Ai Dong Zhang Zia Wang Loli's confession. Offshore peak functions and derivatives. Hungfeng do not repair not dry flowing books and stopping ink. Home cooking pollen catalyst. Snow willow never sleep dumbly. A little bit rain as I menching distant cousin dragon ancestor. 9 peaks and fossils. Top Luther back to earth. Bloodthirsty wolf Loki Grey Aubrey _ Jing Zhe Yankin, starting from scratch. Demon sword 0321 excellent style. Emma's warm brother Sanura Sanchenjai Yuan knife rabbit. Thank you very much. They are a heart of dust. The wolf of history. The sound of the spring closer to home. Newspaper seller Zia Lang Jun sharp knife wind over the world. Brother is so handsome. I would like to thank Shi Tianyuer, senior brother Go, SISI, fossil girl, for staying silent. Ziwan Tanhua, you have worked hard. Finally, a special thank you to Greg Wu. Thank you, thank you. I hope everyone is happy every year, every month is happy, and every day is happy. Urchin, 1 Bao. March, early spring. East of Nanhuang continent, a corner. The gloomy sky was grey and black, showing a heavy depression, as if someone had spilled ink on the rice paper. The ink soaked the sky and smudged the clouds. The clouds layered on top of each other, blending with each other, dispersing one after another of crimson lightning, accompanied by rumbling thunder. It was like a roar of a god, echoing in the world. The blood-colored rain, with sadness, fell to the mortal world. The earth was hazy, and there was a ruined city, silent and lifeless in the red rain of blood. In the city, the walls are broken, everything is withered, and collapsed houses can be seen everywhere, as well as bluish-black corpses and pieces of meat, like broken autumn leaves, withering silently. The bustling streets in the past are now desolate. The sandy road where people used to come and go, is no longer noisy now. There was only blood and mud mixed with minced meat, dust and paper, which could not be separated from each other, which was shocking. Not far away, a crippled carriage was deeply immersed in the mud, full of sadness, except for an abandoned rabbit doll on the carriage, hanging on it, swaying in the wind. The white fluff has long been soaked into wet red, full of eerie. The turbid pupils seemed to have some resentment left, staring alone at the mottled stones ahead. There was a figure lying on his back. This is a 13 or 14-year-old boy, dressed in tatters, full of dirt, with a torn leather bag tied around his waist. The young man squinted his eyes and remained motionless. The biting cold penetrated his tattered coat from all directions and swept through his body, gradually taking away his body temperature. But even if the rain fell on his face, he didn't blink, staring coldly into the distance like a falcon. Following his gaze, at a distance of 7 or 8 feet away from him, a skinny vulture was nibbling on the carrion of a wild dog, occasionally observing the surroundings alertly. It seems that in this dangerous ruin, if there is a slight disturbance, it will instantly vacate. And the boy is like a hunter, patiently waiting for the opportunity. After a long time, the opportunity came, and the greedy vulture finally completely submerged its head into the belly of the wild dog. In an instant, the boy's squinted eyes flashed coldly. His body was like an arrow off the string, rushing out quickly, going straight to the vulture. With a flick of his right hand, he pulled out a black iron stick from the leather bag at his waist. A sharp cold light flashed from the tip of the iron stick. Perhaps it was the perception of murderous intent. The vulture immediately noticed the moment the boy rushed out. Frightened, it flapped its wings and flew into the air, about to fly away. But it was still too late. The black iron stick turned into a black line with the boy's expressionless swipe and shot out. Poof! The sharp iron stick pierced the vulture's head in an instant, shattering the skull and killing him instantly. The powerful impact took its body, tilted and fell, and with a bang, it nailed it to the carriage not far away. The blood-colored doll on the side also swayed more and more due to the turbulence of the carriage. The young man looked calm, his speed did not stop from beginning to end, he went straight to this place, and when he arrived, he grabbed the vulture corpse together with the iron stick. The force was so great that the part of the carriage that was nailed with iron picks also lifted a small piece. After doing this, he quickly left along the edge of the street without looking back. The wind seems to be bigger at this moment, the blood-colored doll on the carriage, shaking, seems to be watching the youth go away. Farther. The wind was indeed stronger, carrying the coldness from the rain, brushing the boy's thin clothes. The boy trembled involuntarily, frowned slightly, shrank his clothes, and let out a sound of inhalation. He hates the cold. And the way to resist the cold is to find a place to rest from the wind and rain, but the young man running on the street at the moment, his speed did not stop at all, and the dilapidated shops passed in front of his eyes. He doesn't have much time. Because it took too long to hunt vultures, there is still one place he hasn't gone to today. It shouldn't be far. The boy whispered to himself, galloping down the street. On the way forward, there were blue-black corpses everywhere. Their lost hope was full of hideousness, as if they had turned into an aura of despair, trying to contaminate the mind of the young man. But the young man is used to it and doesn't even look at it. Until time passed, the young man looked up to the sky from time to time with a little anxiety on his face, as if to him, the change in the sky was more terrifying than those corpses. Fortunately, when he saw a pharmacy in the distance, the boy heaved a sigh of relief and rushed away. The medicine store is not big, there are many medicine cabinets scattered on the ground, exuding a musty smell, like a tomb that has been opened, it is full of mess. In the corner, there was also the body of an old man, his whole body was black and blue, leaning against the wall, as if it was too late to rest his eyes, staring at the outside world absent-mindedly. The young man stepped in and glanced at it, and immediately began to rummage. Most of the herbs here are the same as those corpses, turning blue and black, only a few are normal. Among these normal medicinal herbs, the teenager carefully identified them for a long time. As if recalling his past experiences, he finally picked up a common jinchuang grass and took off the thin shirt on his body, revealing a huge scar on his chest. The scar has not fully healed, and it can be seen that the edge of the wound has begun to turn black, and there is even some blood oozing out. The boy looked down, crushed the herbs, took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and raised his hand to apply a little bit on the wound. In an instant, the severe pain from the wound came suddenly like a surging tide, causing the boy's body to tremble uncontrollably, but he forcibly endured it, but the sweat on his forehead could not be suppressed, dripping down his cheeks onto the dark ground. It became smeared ink. The whole process lasted for more than 10 breaths. After he completely smeared the herbs on the wound, the young man seemed to lose his strength all of a sudden. Slowly put on clothes. Looking at the sky outside again, he took out a broken map from the leather pocket at his waist after thinking, and carefully spread it out. The map is very simple, and it depicts this city. The location of the pharmacy inside has been marked, and in the northeast direction, many areas have been crossed with fingernails, but only 2 areas are left without crosses. After looking for these days, it should be in these 2 areas. The boy's voice was hoarse, he muttered in a low voice, and was about to leave after putting away the map. But before leaving, he looked back at the old man's corpse beside him, and his eyes fell on the corpse's clothes. It was a leather jacket, maybe it was a special leather jacket, and the leather jacket was not corroded much. The young man thought about it, walked over, took off the leather jacket from the old man's body, and put it on himself. The leather jacket was a bit big, but after wrapping his thin body, the young man finally felt a hint of warmth, so he looked down at the old man's open eyes, raised his hand to cover it lightly, and made it restful. "Rest in peace," the young man said, tore off the curtain inside the shop, covered the old man's body, and turned to leave the pharmacy. When he walked out, a shimmer of light reflected from his feet. The boy looked down, and there was a fragment of a mirror the size of a palm in the mud. In the lens, he saw his own face. Although the face reflected in the broken mirror was full of dirt, it could still be vaguely seen that it was an extremely beautiful face. It's just that the immaturity that a 13 or 14-year-old should have, was replaced by indifference. The boy silently looked at himself in the mirror on the ground, raised his foot after a while, and stepped on it. A click. One after another cracks appeared. After smashing the mirror with one foot, he shook his body and galloped away. On the ground, although the broken mirror filled the cracks, it still reflected the sky, as if covering the world, covering all living beings, like half a vast human face with the remnant face of a god. Remnant Mian closed his eyes and indifferent, standing high above, only strands of withered, crooked hair hung down. That is the natural existence of this world, like the sun and the moon. It seems that under him, all living beings are ants, and it is like Jingzhe, the phenomenon of the growth of all things, affected by it, and has to change. At this moment, the sky is also under the face of this god, gradually losing its light. The shadow of the setting sun is like a black haze, filling the ruins of the city, covering the earth, as if to engulf everything. The rain is heavier as the night gradually engulfed, so did the wind, and there were bursts of sharp whimpers. As if the roar of a ghost, it began to awaken the strange existence in this city, causing all kinds of creepy voices to respond one after another in a heart-wrenching manner. The running boy's footsteps are faster and his movements are more rapid. Between this and the fall of night, you are chasing after me, and he flexibly shuttles through the streets. Until, when he passed a collapsed house and wanted to use his strength to jump far, the boy's pupils suddenly shrank. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw not far away, among the ruins, there seemed to be a person. From a distance, the man was neatly dressed, as if he had no injuries, and was sitting there leaning against the wall. The most important thing is that the exposed skin of the other party's body is actually normal color, not blue and black. Such a figure, in this city, unless it is a living person, it is impossible to appear. As for the living, these days, the young man has never met anyone other than himself. This scene shocked his heart, he seemed to think of something very quickly, and his breathing became a little short. "I have the intention to go, but the smog-like night behind me has engulfed it. The boy hesitated, remembered this position, and left quickly. After galloping all the way, the boy finally returned to his temporary residence in this city before the night finally caught up with him. It was a hole in the ground. It was very small and filled with bird feathers. The gap at the entrance is not big, adults can't get in, only teenagers can barely get in here. After entering, he skillfully blocked the entrance with books, rocks, and other debris in the cave. The moment it was completely filled, the dark night outside covered it in an instant. The boy didn't let his guard down, he grabbed the iron stick in his hand, held his breath, and squatted there to listen for a long time. Gradually, the roars and shrill voices of alien beasts came, occasionally mixed with strange laughter. It wasn't until there was a clearer roar, and in the nervousness of the teenager, the voice seemed to pass by, and after it gradually became lighter, he breathed a sigh of relief and sat aside. The cave was dark, and the boy sat there silently, as if time had stopped at this moment. He was dazed for a while, calmed down the nerves that had been tense all day, grabbed a water bottle from his side, took a few sips, ignored the sound outside, and took out the vulture in his pocket. In the dark, put it by the mouth and bite it bit by bit. There were bursts of astringent taste in his throat, but he swallowed it calmly and slowly, and squeezed the food down his throat into his stomach. At the moment, the stomach is wriggling hard, trying to digest and relieve hunger. Soon a whole vulture was eaten by him. The boy took a deep breath, bursts of exhaustion flooded his body, and his eyes slowly closed. But in his hand, he was always holding on to the jet-black iron stick, like a lone wolf dozing off. If there seems to be any abnormality, he will open his eyes instantly. In the outside world at this moment, the darkness is like a curtain, covering the city, the earth, and the sky. The world under the sky is extremely vast, and Nanhuang continent, which is overseas, is only one of them. Few people know how big the whole world is, but the majestic face on the sky, with a strong shock, everyone can look up. The exact time when this face will arrive is unknown. People only know from the descriptions in some ancient books that a long, long time ago, this world full of fairy spirits was prosperous and full of vitality, until, this huge remnant surface, from the depths of the distant void, with destruction, attracted. In the process of arriving, the sentient beings in this world tried every means to stop them, but all failed. In the end, only a few ancient emperors ruled, and they abandoned sentient beings with some clansmen and chose to migrate. Soon, the remnant came and hung in the sky, and from then on, the nightmare came. The breath from him permeates the entire world, and the mountains, the sea, all things, and all living beings, even the spiritual energy that monks rely on to practice, are also infected by it. All things wither, all living beings perish, and there is no one in 100. Since then, those who survived this disaster with difficulty have called this half of the human face, a god. This world is called the end of the land, and the place where the ruler of the ancient emperor goes is called the Holy Land. This title has been passed down from generation to generation after many epochs. And the disasters brought by the gods are not only these. His Majesty suppresses all living beings all the time, because every few years, decades, or even hundreds of years, he will open his eyes from time to time and continue to count his breaths. Every time he opened his eyes and looked at the area, it would be instantly polluted by its strong aura. The living beings were smashed into charcoal and turned into an eternal forbidden area. For many epochs, there have been more and more restricted areas in this world, and fewer habitable areas. And 9 days ago, he opened his eyes again, and the place he looked at was the area where the boy was. All species and a dozen human race cities in that area, no matter where they exist, whether in the slums inside or outside the city, are instantly polluted and turned into forbidden areas for life. Under this terrifying pollution, some of all living beings directly decomposed into blood mist, some mutated into strange beasts without intelligence, and some were left with polluted blue-black corpses. Only a very small number of people and beasts can survive. The young man is one of them. At this moment, outside the pitch-black cave, with a shrill sound from far to near, the sleeping boy quickly opened his eyes. The iron stick in his hand instinctively lifted, and he looked vigilantly at the blocked entrance gap. It wasn't until the shrill voice circled around and gradually moved away that the young man breathed a sigh of relief. With no sleepiness, he touched the leather bag and took out a bamboo slip from it. In the darkness, he touched the writing on the bamboo slip, and there seemed to be some light in his eyes. Then he sat upright, closed his eyes, and adjusted his breathing. The teenager's name is Su Qing, and he has lived alone in a slum outside this city since he was a child. In the sudden catastrophe 9 days ago, he hid in the crevices of the stone. Unlike other people who were terrified and crazy, he calmly looked at the gods who opened their eyes in the sky, and the special cross pupils in the eyes of the gods in the sky seemed to be lost. Emotion of fear. Until he saw a purple light descend from the sky and landed on the northeast side of the city. The next moment, he passed out completely. After waking up, he became the only survivor inside and outside the city. But he didn't leave immediately. Because he knew that the forbidden area formed by the opening of the eyes of the gods would be enveloped by blood rain at the beginning, turning it into an enchantment. People inside can't get out, and people outside can't step in, unless the restricted area is completely formed. And the sign formed is that the blood rain stops. To Su Qing, who grew up in a slum, this catastrophe seemed nothing. Because in the slums, whether it is all kinds of homeless people, wild dogs, or a disease, or even a cold night, people will lose their lives at any time, and it needs to be very difficult to survive. And as long as you live, nothing else matters. Of course, in the cruelty of the slum, there is occasionally a touch of warmth. For example, some destitute scholars will teach and literate a group of their children to make a living. In addition, it is the memory of their relatives. It's just that in Su Qing's mind, the memories of relatives are gradually blurring even if he tries hard to recall them and is afraid that he will forget them. But he knew that he was not an orphan, that he still had relatives, but he had long since been separated. So his ideal is to live. If I could live a little better, if I could have a chance to see my relatives, it would be even better. So he, who was lucky not to die, chose to enter the city. He wanted to go to the residences of the upper-class gentlemen in the city, to find a way to make himself stronger that spread in the slums, and to find the purple light that fell into the city. And the way to become stronger has always been circulated in the slums and is desired by everyone. They call it cultivation, and those who master the method of cultivation are called monks. So becoming a monk was Su Qing's greatest wish, apart from the memories of his relatives. Cultivators are not uncommon. In the past few years in the slum, Su Qing has seen people of this type enter the city from a distance. Their typical feature is that their body will instinctively shudder when they are looking at them. Even Su Qing heard people say that the city owner is a cultivator, and the guards around him also have cultivators. So after searching for a long time in the city, 5 days ago, he finally found the bamboo slip in his hand on a corpse in the city lord's mansion. It was very dangerous there. The wound on his chest was left at that time. What the bamboo slips recorded was the cultivation method he longed for. All the content on it has long been familiar to him, and even in the past few days, he has begun to try to practice. Su Qing had never seen other cultivation techniques, and this bamboo slip was the only one obtained, and he did not know how to practice it correctly. Fortunately, most of the descriptions are simple and easy to understand words, focusing on visualization and breathing. So after working step by step, he also gained some gains. This method is called Haishanju. The way to practice is to think of the totem carved on the bamboo slips in your mind, and to breathe in and out with specific breathing. This pattern is very strange. It is an alien existence. www.mtlnovel.com with a big head and a small body, only one leg, his whole body is black, and his face is as ferocious as a ghost. Su Qing had never seen such a creature, and the bamboo slips called it a mandrill. At this moment, with the practice, Not long after the pattern appeared in his mind, Su Qing's breathing gradually changed, and there was an undercurrent in the nearby air. The surrounding spiritual energy poured in, slowly burrowing into his body, flowing through the whole body, bursting with piercing cold, and the parts where he passed were like being in ice water. Su Qing was afraid of the cold, but he endured it and didn't give up, and persisted. Until after a long time, when he finally finished his practice according to the bamboo slips, his body was soaked in cold sweat. And just after eating the belly of the vulture, I felt hungry again. Su Qing wiped away the cold sweat and touched her stomach again, her eyes showing firmness. Since practicing this exercise, his appetite has increased significantly, and his body has become more flexible than ever. All of this made him have a stronger tolerance for the cold during cultivation. Looking up at this moment, Su Qing followed the gap at the entrance and looked outside. The outside world was pitch dark, and there was only a terrifying roar, strong and weak, echoing in his ears. He didn't know the real reason why he became a survivor, maybe it was a fluke, or maybe it was. He saw that purple light. So while looking for exercises these days, he is also constantly going to the northeast region to find the place where Ziguang falls, but unfortunately he never found it. In his thoughts, Su Qing listened to the roars outside. The corpse leaning against the wall that I saw when I came back at sunset could not help but narrow my eyes. The place where the other party is located is the northeast region, and it seems to be a living person. Could it have something to do with purple light? If it is a living person, it may really be related to the purple light, but it may also be a trap. Su Qing pondered and pondered. In these days in the ruined city, he deeply knew the existence of those creatures that were polluted by the breath of gods and turned into alien beasts, each of which was extremely ferocious and infinitely powerful. But perhaps because the restricted area has not been fully formed, most of these alien beasts are asleep during the day. Unless he broke into the outer area of the place where they slept when he obtained the bamboo slips last time. Otherwise, if you are more careful on weekdays, it will be fine. Compared to them, Su Qing is more wary of living people, because sometimes human hearts are more sinister than beasts. So after thinking about it, his eyes slowly became cold and stern, whether it was a living person, a trap, or not, that area. He was ready to go again. But when you go, you need to be fully prepared. Thinking of this, Su Qing grabbed the cultivation bamboo slip in his hand. In the past few days of cultivation, the changes in his body gave him some confidence, and the contents of the bamboo slips could not help but emerge in his mind, in addition to the exercises, the introduction of cultivation. Cultivation is inherited from the ancient years before the remnants of the gods arrived. Although there have been changes now, the overall system is still the same as before. It is divided into condensing qi, foundation building, forming elixir, and yuan yin. As for nascent soul, perhaps the realm was too high, and there was no record on the bamboo slips, but it clearly pointed out the helplessness of the monks in cultivation. Because the breath of the gods invaded the psychic energy was polluted, and this pollution is like a poisonous thing to all things. I don't know since when, everyone called the breath of the gods as alien. Su Qing knew very well that the coldness she felt when she practiced before was actually because the inhaled spiritual energy was mixed with foreign substances. Once this kind of heterogeneity accumulates in the body to a certain extent, it will make the cultivator alienate, either die violently into a blood mist, or turn into a mindless beast. In the area where the gods opened their eyes, the concentration of heterogeneity suddenly increased sharply. In fact, this change was accelerated in an instant. Cultivation is dangerous. But if you don't practice, in this end world full of divine aura pollution, people's life expectancy is generally reduced, and there are many evil diseases. It is like living in the 9 secluded purgatory, and almost no one can die peacefully. Therefore, cultivation has become the only way after there is no choice. So for countless years, people have evolved generations of cultivation methods based on inheritance. What is circulating today is that while absorbing the spiritual energy, at the same time, using the exercise method, the heterogeneity mixed in the spiritual energy is separated and compressed in a certain position of the body. This location is called the alienation point. Therefore, the ratio of separating heterogeneity has become an important criterion for distinguishing the merits and demerits of exercises. And almost all the high separation ratio exercises are mastered by big forces or families, and that is their important resource. This is actually the same regardless of whether the gods come or not. According to the different cultivation methods, the degree of separation of heterogeneity is different, and the area where the alienation point exists is also different. But in any case, as long as you cultivate, there will be heterogeneity, and a point of alienation will gradually form. The point of alienation is theoretically irreversible. Although it can be resolved through some medicinal herbs, it can also cure the symptoms but not the root cause. As for the method of thoroughly purifying the point of alienation, the bamboo slip also mentioned a sentence. In the end world, in addition to Nanhuang continent, there is a more majestic continent called Wangwu. Although the origin of the human race is also polluted by the aura of the gods, it seems that a way to completely purify it has been found. But obviously, this method cannot be quantified, and only the extremely noble can enjoy it. Ordinary cultivator is beyond expectation. As for the low-level scattered cultivators with the largest number, it is even more impossible to obtain them. Most of the exercises in loose cultivation have a very low degree of separation, so not only is it difficult to cultivate, but the risk of alienation is also greater. Although the risk of cultivation is so great, for most people, the figure of monks is still common. For example, Su Qing, he knew that he could be regarded as a loose cultivator. Although according to the records on the bamboo slips, the monks in the last world are walking on a difficult and dangerous road of no return, just like a mortal swimming to the deep sea, to the unreachable shore. But often, before seeing the other side of the legend, he died of exhaustion. But Su Qing, who grew up in a slum, deeply understands that a conflict or a disease will cause people to lose their lives. So instead of worrying about alienation in the future, it's better to worry about whether you will be alive tomorrow. Su Qing murmured, touched the scar on his chest, and looked at the sky outside the gap. At this moment, it seems that it is not far from the dawn outside, and the roars and shrill sounds are much less. If the blood rain continues and Ziguang has not been found, consider leaving and go to other cities to find herbs. Su Qing looked down at her wound. Because of the pervasive aura of the gods and the continuous blood rain, almost all the items in the city were seriously polluted, including medicinal herbs, and resources were very scarce. Su Qing raised her hand and pressed it on the scar on her chest, some blood oozing out. His face was a little pale, he took a deep breath, took off the clothes inside the leather jacket, wrapped it around his back, and tied his wounds. He recovered himself, and silently waited for the dawn. It didn't take long, the roars and grief from the outside world became less and less. Until it disappeared completely, Su Qing noticed through the gap that the sky outside was already bright. According to his past experience, it is possible to go out at this moment. But instead of leaving immediately, he stood up and moved his somewhat stiff body. After a burst of warmth, he removed the stone debris blocking the gap, and with the help of the weak light from outside, he opened his leather bag and sorted it out. A dagger full of rust was tied beside his calf by him. The jet-black iron sign was placed in the most convenient position by him. There was also a snake head, which he wrapped in sackcloth, carefully opened it, checked it, and put it away carefully. After doing this, Su Qing closed his eyes and opened them abruptly after a few breaths. His eyes were replaced by calm. He quickly drilled through the gap and paused at the exit. After vigilantly looking around, it was confirmed that there was no problem. Su Qing rushed forward, and as the sky gradually brightened, he reached the outside world. Galloping forward. Because of the continuous blood rain and dense clouds, the sun here is not visible at dawn, let alone strong sunlight. The dim morning light is like a seriously ill old man with longevity spots, and the turbid eyes still seem to have the frost of the night. And the breath that was exhaled turned into the morning wind, blowing the smell of death, very cold, very cold. If you don't warm up, your whole body will tremble involuntarily when the wind blows. But for Su Qing, his body still retains the previous warmth, so he was not affected too much. At this moment, the speed is not reduced, and it goes straight to the area where there are suspected living people that I saw yesterday. Looking from a distance, in the empty city, Su Qing's figure was like a leopard, jumping on top of broken walls and debris. The clouds and flowing water did not stop at all. And he was accompanied by a group of birds flying across the sky, but their position was very high and difficult to catch. While galloping, Su Qing looked up at the birds in the sky and licked his lips. He didn't know the reason. After the gods opened their eyes, all living things were polluted and almost all died, including beasts, but only birds survived the most. And these birds were the focus of his hunting during this period of time. At the same time, although the birds were also trapped in the blood rain, they seemed to instinctively find some safe shelters, such as Su Qing's burrows, which were previously discovered along the bird's trail. This kind of shelter is actually not absolutely safe, but relatively speaking, it seems that it is easier to be ignored by those alien beasts and weirdness. Su Qing discovered two places these days, one was his cave, and the other was outside the city lord's mansion. But at this moment, he just swept the sky, then withdrew his gaze and locked on a position of the city, getting closer and closer. Soon, Su Qing approached the area he saw yesterday. He did not go directly, but went around to find a high point. After climbing up cautiously, he lay down, motionless, his eyes narrowed as little as possible, and he slowly lowered his head to look over. At a glance, Su Qing's pupils closed, and he saw the person from yesterday again. The other party was sitting beside the ruins, neatly dressed and with normal skin. The most important thing is his demeanor, his body, everything about him is exactly the same as what Su Qing expected yesterday. It was as if the other party didn't move for a whole night. This is extremely unreasonable. If the other party is alive, it is impossible to turn a blind eye to the danger that exists in the dark night of the city. If the other party is dead, this uncontaminated corpse is the best food for those alien beasts, so it is impossible for them to exist until now. Su Qing was silent. After thinking about it in his heart, he lay there motionless. Growing up in a slum, he was not short of patience. So just like this, under his careful gaze, time passed slowly, until noon passed, and the man remained motionless. Su Qing, who had been waiting for 3 hours, raised his right hand slightly after pondering. A stone was caught in his hand and shot towards the opponent's location. The stone was very fast, and the impact was not small. When it landed on the figure in the ruins, it made a bang. The figure swayed and fell to the side like a corpse. And at the moment he fell, a ray of purple on www.mtlnovel.com appeared on the ground where he once sat. The moment he saw Zemang, Su Qing's eyes were full of light, and he was short of breath. He had been looking for these days, and what he was looking for was the purple light that he had seen descending into the city. At this moment, he forcibly restrained the urge to go immediately, waited for a while, and after making sure there was nothing in the way, he rushed out. The speed is so fast that almost all of its strength erupts, and the whole person is like a falcon, going straight to where the purple light is. After arriving quickly, he grabbed Zai Guang, and the figure did not hesitate to lash back and away. The whole process was extremely fast, until after retreating more than 10 meters, Su Qing stopped out of breath and looked at the purple light he was holding in his hand. It was a purple crystal, crystal clear, with a dazzling beauty. Su Qing's heart was beating faster. When he looked up, he saw the fallen corpse. It seemed that he had lost the protection of the purple light. At this moment, the clothes were corroded and the skin instantly turned blue and black. This scene made Su Qing instinctively grasp the purple crystal in his hand tighter, turned around and ran towards his own hole. Not long after running, Su Qing suddenly stopped, looking a little confused. He lowered his head and untied his leather jacket and looked at his bound chest. There was no blood oozing out there, but instead there was a feeling of itching. Su Qing's eyes froze, and he tore off the rags he was wearing. When he looked at the wound, his heart shook violently. He clearly remembered that during the early morning checkup, the injury had not healed, and it even turned black, but now most of the scar on his chest has healed, and there is only a shallow scar left on the edge. This. Su Qing breathed rapidly, then suddenly looked at the purple crystal in his hand. This thing. There was a strong light in Su Qing's eyes, and before the amethyst was taken away by himself, the corpse that was intact appeared in his mind. Can the body be kept intact, and the wounds of the living can be healed quickly? Su Qing grasped the purple crystal in her hand, her heart beating fast, and she looked around. Although he knew that there should be no other living people here, he was instinctively vigilant because he obtained the treasure. At this moment, he no longer stopped, but galloped at full speed, heading straight for the hole where he was hiding. On the way, he faintly discovered that not only did his injury heal quickly, but even his physical fatigue seemed to be much less. In the past, when he ran like this, he needed to slow down for about half an hour, but now that half an hour has passed, he feels warm all over his body and seems to be still full of energy. Even on his way back, he caught a fallen bird. Instead of killing them, they stunned them, because living creatures last longer. Even after doing this, the time for him to return to the burrow has been shortened a lot. When there was still some time before the night, he had already seen his own burrow from a distance. Su Qing's mood improved as never before, but he was not negligent. Because he knew that maybe it was because the gods opened their eyes and the restricted area was just completed. When this area is at night, in addition to the awakening of alien beasts, some strange beings will appear. He heard people say in the slums that he knew that there are many places in the world where there are many deaths, and this kind of strangeness will form. Such as the laughter coming from outside at night, it is this kind of existence. As for this kind of alien, it is generally accepted that you should not see it, touch it, or encounter it. Although he had previously experienced that those beings appeared at night, Su Qing was not sure whether they would occasionally appear during the day. So his speed did not decrease in the slightest, and soon he approached the underground hole, and after flashing in, he blocked the cracks in the underground hole. Then he sat down with his knees crossed and opened his clenched palm. The purple light scattered from his palm, reflecting the small hole in the ground. Under the light, Su Qing's face and eyes were also rendered purple. He kept his eyes fixed, staring at the purple crystal in his palm. This crystal strip is about the size of his finger, and there seems to be some flocculant inside it, and the purple light is emitted by those flocks. Healing the wound. Su Qing observed for a long time, unbuttoned his shirt and looked at the scar on his chest, and found that the wound had healed 90%. Now, the remaining part seems to be completely healed in a short time, and even the surrounding scars are dissipating. Rethinking that he ran all the way back, feeling much less tired than before, Su Qing had already made a preliminary judgment on this purple crystal in his heart. The function of this thing is obviously to recover your injuries, recover your stamina, and recover your vitality. I don't know if there are other effects. Su Qing murmured, thinking in his eyes. He didn't know if the purple crystal had something to do with the gods opening their eyes, but it was probably the case. But in any case, this is a treasure. At least Su Qing has never heard of anything that has such amazing resilience since he was a child. Putting such an item by your side, helping oneself is equivalent to a second life. But Su Qing is very clear that now he can own this thing because there is no other living person in this city besides himself. And once the blood rain is over, after he walks out, such a treasure, he may not be able to protect it. So the only way is to hide this purple crystal. Su Qing pondered for a while, then glanced at the comatose bird that he had caught, and raised his hand to grab it. After pinching his beak so that he couldn't make a sound, he took out the dagger on his calf and cut a wound directly on the bird. While the bird was struggling, Su Qing stuffed the purple crystal inside. Then he paid close attention without blinking his eyes. I saw that the bird was still struggling at first, but soon there were undercurrents all around. The spiritual energy seemed to be attracted, even more than the spiritual energy that emerged during Su Qing's cultivation, and went straight to the bird's body. And the strength of this bird's struggle was instantly much stronger than before. Compared with Su Qing's strength, it seemed that he couldn't grasp it. This scene made Su Qing's eyes shine brightly. In the past, the neck of a bird could be crushed by a handful, but now he squeezed it several times before breaking it. Quickly took out the purple crystal from his body and wiped it, he closed his eyes and thought. The bird didn't die, but there was an influx of spiritual energy, and the bird's strength suddenly became extremely large. It shouldn't be a problem. After a while, Su Qing opened his eyes, with determination in his eyes, and directly stuffed the purple crystal into the wound on his chest that was about to heal completely. The process of inserting was a little painful, but Su Qing gritted his teeth and endured it. There is no safer place than hiding in one's own body. And he has also simply verified that it seems that the effect will be better when this thing is placed in the body. With the integration of the purple crystal, as the wound on his chest healed, before Su Qing could examine it carefully, a roaring sound came from his body. A psychic energy that was even more majestic than the force attracted by the birds before, came directly from all directions, piercing the soil and whistling towards him. This psychic energy was so amazing that Su Qing's body turned light blue in an instant, and an indescribable icy cold filled his body. This is caused by too much heterogeneity in Chinic energy. But Su Qing was prepared long ago, and at this moment, he ran the sea mountain art without any hesitation. With the operation, the spiritual energy pouring into his body was suddenly separated into a large number of heterogeneities. The remaining pure spiritual energy flowed along the meridians of his whole body, causing Su Qing's body to make a thumping sound at this moment. It was as if some blockages in the body were instantly opened, and the flesh and blood were nourished and refined at this moment. The mandrill figure he visualized in his mind seemed to be alive at this moment, posing in various poses on his own. Although Haishanju is a practice method, it is not a practice method, but a kind of body training. It is divided into 10 layers, corresponding to the 10 layers of the Qi condensation realm. There is a clear introduction to it on the bamboo slips. Each layer allows practitioners to increase the power of one tiger. 5 tigers are 1 mandrill, and 2 mandrills are 1 leader. It is said that the mandrill can move the mountain, and the Kuei can move the sea, so it is named Haishanju. At this moment, the purple crystal buried in his chest is like a vortex, constantly sucking and withdrawing, and the spiritual energy comes like an empowerment. Su Qing's cultivation speed also increased sharply. I don't know how long it took, the banging sound in his body suddenly became strong, and a large amount of impurities in the body flowed out from the pores of his sweat. A foul smell also permeated the cave. And with the outflow of impurities, Su Qing's body became a lot more crystal clear, and the face covered by dirt became more and more beautiful at this moment. After a while, Su Qing's eyes suddenly opened as the sound in his body and the influx of spiritual energy gradually disappeared. There was a flash of purple light in his eyes. After returning to normal, Su Qing's expression froze for a while. At this moment, the dark hole in the ground became clearer in his eyes. He hurriedly looked down at himself, and his expression gradually revealed disbelief. This feeling. With a hint of excitement on Su Qing's expression, she stood up and punched, causing a sharp wind. Because the hole in the ground is very small, he can't try to speed, but the feeling of raising his legs and punching let him know that he has been amazingly improved in all aspects than before. Then he immediately rolled up the sleeve on his left arm. When she saw a black spot the size of a fingernail appeared on her forearm, Su Qing took a deep breath and suppressed the excitement in her heart. It turns out that this is the condensed gas layer. This black spot, according to the description on the bamboo slips, is the alienation point. The alienation point of Haishan-ju is on the left arm, and one is added to each layer. Touching the alienation point on his arm, Su Qing was more excited about his apparent strength at the moment, so he raised his head and looked at the entrance of the gap, thinking in his heart to try the speed when it was dawn. But soon Su Qing looked suspicious, approached the entrance of the gap, and listened carefully. Outside, it was still pitch black, but there was no abnormal sound at all. This is something he has never encountered in the many days he has been here. In the past, even after dawn, there were no strange beasts and strange sounds, but the sound of rain existed all the time. But now the sound of rain is gone. Could it be? Su Qing was shocked, and a guess emerged in his heart. Waiting silently, until a dazzling light came in along the entrance of the hole, and reflected in Su Qing's dark eyes, as if lighting up his world. At the moment of seeing the light, Su Qing's body trembled obviously. He raised his hand, slowly approached the ray of sunshine, placed it in it, held the sunshine in the palm of his hand, and the long-lost warmth slowly awakened his sleeping soul. Sunlight. After a long while, Su Qing's eyes showed a bright look, pushed aside the debris blocking the gap, and as more beams embraced, he slowly got out. The moment he leaned out of the exit, he raised his head, and what he saw was no longer a thick and dark cloud, but a bright and brilliant sun. It seems that the old man in the morning light has regained his vitality after being seriously ill for many days. The rain has stopped. Su Qing took a deep breath of the sun-filled air, and silently looked at the city under the shade of the morning sun. Everything in the city, under this dazzling red sun, seems to have some different brilliance. The bright red morning glow on the horizon shone down from the cracks of the clouds, like countless whales spewing golden waterfalls, washing away the haze and fog of the city little by little, revealing mottled scars. The collapsed houses, the blue-black corpses, and the shocking blood-colored puddles all seemed to remind Su Qing of the catastrophe that happened here. Su Qing's eyes showed a touch of complexity. He lived in a slum outside the city for 6 years, and he also looked at this city for 6 years. Although he didn't come here many times, this was the place he wanted to live most in the past 6 years. I obtained the cultivation technique here. I got the purple crystal here. I'm here. I survived. Su Qing murmured, silent. Until he sighed softly for a long time, walked to a blue-black corpse, looked down for a long time, carried it on his back, and walked forward. After walking all the way to a nearby square, he put the body down, then turned around and carried the second, third, fourth. Some corpses were scattered on the streets, and some were buried under the rubble. Until he carried all the corpses in the nearby area to the square, the corpses here were piled up like mountains, some complete and some incomplete. Su Qing stood there and set a fire. Perhaps it was because of the heterogeneity. In the thick smoke, Su Qing watched for a long time and walked away silently. www.mtlnovel.com went to the second area, and soon, another thick smoke rose, more and more many. Just like that, on the first day when the sun shone into this ruined city, in addition to the light, there was thick black smoke from the cremation of the corpse. The black smoke rose up one after another, covering the sun, and at this moment, the morning light was also full of powerlessness, turning dim red, as if hiding a deep sigh. It seems that the thick smoke has become its tears. And the reflections formed on the ground seem to have turned into tears on the ground. The last tear stain was where Su Qing discovered the purple light. There, Su Qing put down the corpse of the old man in the pharmacy. As the flames of the corpse burned, the heat wave hit his face. He stood silently beside the fire, the billowing flames reflected in his dark pupils, shaking constantly. The long, withered hair was also bent by the heat wave. After a while, Su Qing's body was bent in the same way, bowing her head. Rest, rest in peace. At this moment, the flames burned violently and became more and more intense, emitting countless flames like dandelions, which were scattered with the wind. It's just that the thick smoke that curled up into the sky still carried the unwillingness and regret that the deceased couldn't dissolve, and the wind couldn't blow it away. Rising higher and higher, like a few scars on the sky. Insignificant, full of helplessness. After a long time, along with the chaotic footsteps, a strange yin and yang voice suddenly came from a distance behind the boy. I said, how come I didn't see the corpse along the way? It turned out that there was such a foolish boy who did not hesitate to use his own strength to move the corpse here for cremation. Well, since you are so nostalgic, then I will help you and throw you in to accompany them. Su Qing turned around suddenly. The moment he turned around, Su Qing quickly swept behind him. He saw 7 or 8 feet away, 7 people in different positions, approaching him scatteredly. These 7 people are all adults, male and female, mainly dressed in leather jackets, dark grey in color, and hung with many leather bags. Everyone has weapons on them, and they are scattered. 3 of them held bows and 2 held knives. Neither of them left their backs for each other, as if they were on guard. There is another person wearing gloves on his hands, walking alone, and his position is the middle. As for the person who just had a strange tone of yin and yang, it was a tall and strong man. This person was carrying a huge battle axe and was the closest to Su Qing. His body is extremely burly, with a hideous scar on his face, and he is full of beards. At this moment, there is cruelty in his eyes, and he takes big steps with a grim smile, approaching Su Qing. All of this was what Su Qing saw after a glance. His pupils contracted, and his mind instantly analyzed that these people were not like a whole, but more like a temporary team. This is clearly seen from their positions and their precautions. Moreover, Su Qing had already guessed the identities of these people. They are all scavengers. There is no shortage of scavengers in Nanhuang continent. Most of them are ferocious and have no bottom line to speak of. Everything is naked prey of the weak. Obviously, this time the blood rain in the restricted area stopped, the barrier opened, and the scavengers around were attracted and flocked. For them, although the restricted area is dangerous, they are people who live on the edge of the knife. The resources contained in the empty city are enough to make them readied. Even though most of the materials are polluted, there are still valuable things. As the thoughts in his heart were spinning rapidly, Su Qing swayed and was about to jump from one side. But the big man who was approaching him saw that Su Qing was about to run away, his eyes were even more murderous, and there was bloodthirsty in his grin. Want to run? I like to torture and kill a brat like you the most. There should be a lot of items in your leather bag, Thunder Team, this kid, give it to me. The cruelty in the big man's eyes seemed to radiate from his pupils to form a deterrent. With his tall body and battle axe, he felt a great sense of oppression. At this moment, he strode forward, and his right battle axe was even more swung, and he threw it in the direction Su Qing wanted to jump. With a whimper, the battle axe pierced the distance between the two sides with a whistling sound, approaching from midair in an instant. The big man is very strong and his movements are not slow, but Su Qing's speed is even faster. Almost at the moment when the battle axe arrived, his body suddenly accelerated to avoid him. The battle axe whizzed past him in front of him. The gust of wind blew on Su Qing's face, and blew up some of his messy hair, revealing the cold, wolf-like eyes under his hair. In the next instant, Su Qing rolled over on the ground, but instead of running away, he approached the big man, raised his right hand, and a jet-black iron stick appeared directly in his hand. Taking advantage of the fact that he was not as tall as the opponent, Su Qing jumped up and the iron stick in his hand stabbed at the big man's chin from bottom to top. All of this was too fast. Su Qing's thin body and his previous attempts to escape formed a natural cover for his move, so that the big man also felt a sense of life and death crisis at this moment. But after all, he is very experienced. At this moment, his face changed drastically, and his upper body suddenly leaned back, avoiding the iron sign in a dangerous way, but a bloodstain was still drawn on his chin. But without waiting for his inner anger to burn, Su Qing looked indifferent, and he quickly pulled out the dagger from his calf with his left hand after missing a single blow. When the upper body of the big man leaned back, he directly lowered his body and stabbed the dagger into the back of the big man's right foot. With a puff, the dagger penetrated the straw sandals, penetrated the flesh and blood, and nailed it directly into the soil. The big man's expression was distorted, severe pain swept his body, and a shrill scream suddenly came out. He was about to fight back, but Su Qing was too nimble. Send! The swaying firelight covered his face, making him look a little uncertain, but those wolf-like eyes were unable to be covered by the firelight, and he looked at the scavengers with vigilance and ferocity. All of this happened so fast, and Su Qing's age and body were confusing, so many of the scavengers were careless and didn't react immediately. At this moment, their eyes were fierce, and the eyes of the three who opened the bow were sharp. Su Qing, who was hiding behind the bunker, didn't look at the big man who was screaming and pulling out the dagger on his instep not far away. Instead, he swept over the three bow bearers and finally looked at the one standing in the middle with a fist. Set of people. This person is an old man. Although his clothes are similar to others, his eyes are the sharpest, and on him, Su Qing faintly felt the subtle fluctuations of his spiritual energy. Furthermore, from his position and the instinctive gazes of others around him, Su Qing had some judgment in his heart. The other party should be the temporary leader of these scavengers. Su Qing looked at the old man and analyzed it from the bottom of his heart, and the old man was also looking at him with something strange in his eyes. Soon the old man looked away, looking at the incineration flame that was still rising not far away, and became silent. At this moment, the big man who drew the dagger, with fury in his eyes, let out a roar, and was about to rush towards Su Qing. "Little brat, see how I kill you!" Su Qing's eyes narrowed, revealing a fierce light, just as he was about to make a move, but at this moment, an old voice came calmly. "Enough!" These two words seemed to have a shock and awe, so that the roaring man had to stop and look back at the speaker. The one who spoke was the old man with gloves that Su Qing had just expected. "Thunder Team! This child should be a survivor of the slum outside, and the gods are all open to him, so don't take action, let's go." But there was a strong unwillingness in the big man's eyes. He believed that he was only careless before. If he really shot, he would crush Su Qing's neck within a few breaths. So just as he was about to speak, the old man gave him a light look. "Do you want me to say it a second time?" The big man was struggling, but in the end he lowered his head. Just bowing his head, he looked out of the corner of his eye to Su Qing who was hiding in the bunker. Murderous intent flashed across his face, then turned around with a gloomy face, and limped towards the old man. Su Qing felt this murderous intention, narrowed his eyes slightly, looked at the group of scavengers vigilantly, and gradually walked away. But just after they walked a few dozen feet away, the old man in the middle paused and turned his head, not knowing whether he was looking at Su Qing or the burning flames of the cremated corpses. He suddenly opened his mouth after a while. "Child, are you willing to leave here with me?" Su Qing was stunned for a moment. He noticed that in the other party's words, it was me, not us. So he fell silent, his eyes swept across the group of people, and the old man was also patient, without urging, standing in the distance waiting for the answer. After more than 10 breaths, Su Qing swept over these people many times, looked at the old man, and looked at the cold-faced big man who was injured by him. A strange light flashed in the young man's eyes. He stood up slowly, without speaking, and slowly approached them. Seeing Su Qing approaching, the old man smiled, turned around and continued walking. The others also gave Su Qing a deep look and followed. In this way, Su Qing followed the group of scavengers and watched them search for valuables in the city. During this period, he learned the nickname of the ferocious big man, and others called him a rotten bull. This person also swept over Su Qing many times, and there was a gloomy gleam in his eyes. But he was obviously restrained, as if he wasn't in a hurry, waiting for the chance that the old man who stopped him was not there. And he seems to be very sure that such an opportunity will definitely come on the road in the future. Su Qing pondered for a while, thinking of the greed of the big man, so with his familiarity with the city, he gave these scavengers some help. Su Qing's low posture made these scavengers search for valuables faster and found more items. And Kanyu is obviously greedy, even if he can't hold it on his body and exceeds his own weight, he still wants to take more. So, already injured, he searched more than others, and the items he was carrying were heavier. It was nothing at first, but as time passed, Dahan's physical strength was obviously consumed a lot, and his exhaustion was far more than everyone else. As for the area of the city lord's mansion, Su Qing considered that the old man known as the Thunder Team would be helpful to him, so he did not lead them. Until night was about to fall, the group finally left the city and camped in the former slum outside the city. Their movements were very skilled, and they set up 6 tents. Except for the 2 people holding the knife and one tent, everyone else was alone. They even lit incense outside the tent. Someone took out some powder and sprinkled it around. Seeing that the sky was getting darker, all kinds of roars in the city began to echo, and these scavengers all walked into the tents. Only Lady Dui glanced at Su Qing, who was alone, took out a sleeping bag from the side, and threw it over. Burning incense can disperse alien beasts, and powder can avoid weirdness. With your contribution today, with me here, Kanyu wouldn't dare to beat you, pay attention, it's fairly safe here. After speaking, the old man ignored it and walked into the tent. Su Qing didn't say anything, just looked deeply at the old man's tent, picked up the sleeping bag, opened it, and got in. But it didn't seal it, but left a gap in the direction of the scavenger's tent. In the middle of the night, the roars and shrill sounds of the outside world became more and more intense, and the strange cries also swirled, and the terrifying atmosphere seemed to be everywhere in the outside world. It seems that no one is willing to leave the shelter at this time. Only Su Qing. He opened his eyes in the sleeping bag, didn't move, and waited silently. Until time passed, and in the middle of the night when people were most asleep, Su Qing slowly crawled out of the sleeping bag. He moved very carefully, trying not to make any noise. The roars and grief in the city echoed in his ears, but they didn't take away the slightest bit of his mind. After carefully crawling out, Su Qing walked silently to the tent where the big Han Kanyu was. He does not allow hidden dangers that threaten his own life around him. Even if it is just a hidden danger, he will find a way to solve it immediately. This is the rule that Su Qing learned from the lessons of blood after surviving in the slum. That's why he agreed to follow. Even in the daytime, he reminded everyone to make them gain more, but he saw the greed of Kanyu, and wanted to make him more tired and lose his vigilance when he was injured. And his deliberately lowering his stance was also to paralyze the other party and make him less likely to take precautions. All of this is for the sake of the current shot. At this moment, Su Qing looked calm and approached the tent gently, not acting rashly, but squatting there first and listening carefully for a while. The grunting sound that entered his ears was even, continuous and stable, not like a fake. After confirming this, Su Qing narrowed his eyes, slowly pulled out his iron stick, gently opened the button of the tent, and slowly got in. It was dark inside the tent, and Su Qing could vaguely see the remnant cow lying there. He was sleeping very deeply. It was obviously due to the load during the day and the injury, which made him extremely tired. And the mentality of a strong man made Kanyu never imagine that a young man with a cooperating attitude during the day would take an adventure in the middle of the night when other scavengers were present. So at this moment, he didn't know that there was an uninvited guest in his tent. Su Qing looked at the sleeping Kanyu, his cold eyes were as calm as the deep sea, and he approached gently until he stood beside him. Su Qing did not hesitate at all, the dagger in his right hand flashed coldly, and instantly the Kanyu was at a loss. On the neck, a severe cut. The strength was so great that the corpse was almost separated. Blood spurted instantly. The severe pain caused Kanyu's eyes to suddenly open, and when he saw Su Qing's expressionless face, his expression showed disbelief and horror. He was about to struggle, but Su Qing's left hand was quickly raised and pressed against his mouth, so that it can't make the slightest sound. And the struggle became more and more intense at this moment. Kanyu's eyes widened, and his whole body twitched wildly. However, Su Qing's hands were like iron pliers, pressing firmly, and his right foot even lifted up, stepping directly on Kanyu's belly, turning itself into a bow shape. With the help of stable strength, Kanyu's struggle was useless. With the continuous gushing of blood, Kanyu was like a fish that has left the water, and the meaning of despair slowly emerges strongly in his eyes, and he even shows pleading. But what he saw was still Su Qing's calm face. As for the sound of his body struggling, it was also covered up in the outside world's roars and shrill screams, and nothing could be heard. Time passed slowly, until after 10 breaths, Kanyu's struggle gradually weakened, and finally trembled. The whole person relaxed, motionless, only the eyes were open, the fear before death remained, and he died. Su Qing did not raise his hand immediately, but waited for a while to confirm that the other party was really dead, then let go of his hand, wiped the blood on it, and opened his leather bag. From the inside, he carefully took out the snake head wrapped in sackcloth, and carefully used the snake head's fangs to pierce Kanyu's skin. In the next instant, with the spread of toxins, green bubbles appeared on Kanyu's body and slowly melted. After a stick of incense, the corpse completely turned into a pool of blood, seeping into the soil on the ground. Su Qing watched all this silently, began to organize the scene, and then dealt with the relics of Kanyu, making the illusion that the other party was missing, and then got out of the tent. The cold wind blew on his face, taking away some of the smell that had stained on him. Su Qing looked up at the night, took a deep breath of the cold air, and slowly returned to his sleeping bag. The moment he lay in the sleeping bag, his heart finally calmed down, and the sense of security brought by the removal of the hidden danger made him close his eyes and fall asleep quickly, but the iron stick in his hand was always tightly gripped and never loosened in the slightest. Silent all night. In the early morning of the next day, the morning sun fell and reflected the earth. Su Qing opened his eyes and quietly climbed out of the sleeping bag. His eyes swept to the tent where Kanyu was. The next moment, his eyes narrowed slightly. Kanyu's tent actually disappeared. Su Qing's heart sank and became more vigilant. Soon other scavengers also walked out of the tent one after another in the early morning. They found out about this at the first time, and they were all surprised. Some people searched everywhere to no avail. But because the remnant cow disappeared completely, even the tent was gone, so some people judged that the other party should be greedy for the things in the city and left in the middle of the night www.mtlnovel.com or for other reasons, and left without saying goodbye. In short, in this restricted area, there are too many reasons for a person to disappear. It was originally a temporary team, and Kanyu was alone, so soon these scavengers stopped paying attention to this matter, and some people looked at Su Qing, but they seemed to think that this matter could not be related to Su Qing, plus there is no obligation to investigate, so the guesswork is retracted. Only the old man called Thunder Team took back Su Qing's sleeping bag, gave him a meaningful look, and said lightly, "Now, are you still going with me?" This sentence has far-reaching meaning, and Su Qing is silent. The old man didn't say anything, and called everyone to hurry under the early sun. Su Qing stood there for a while, then instinctively turned back to look at the ruined city. Finally, he turned his head and looked at the old man's back. After thinking about it, he followed, walking, and his steps gradually became firmer. 6 scavengers, 1 child, their figures were pulled for a long time under the sunday. In the distance, a wind blew past, wafting away their size and emotions when they moved forward. This is the catastrophe of the gods, and the whole city is destroyed. There is one more restricted area in this world. It's nothing, you've heard it. 7 or 8 years ago, there was a big city in the northern area. When the gods opened their eyes, the area and the city disappeared strangely, as if it never existed. The voice of the conversation is getting weaker and weaker. Under the early sun, in the faraway figure, the young man is silent, listens silently, and walks silently. Farther. As a young cute newcomer, I am anxious to release a pink and tender new book. Brothers and sisters, please take care of me, ask for collection, ask for recommendation, ask for monthly pass. The restricted area formed by this corner of the eastern part of Nanhuangzhou is not very large. And the ruins where Su Qing and his party left were on the edge of the restricted area. This is also the reason why the scavengers can rush to the city on the first day when the sun comes. So when it was getting late, they were about to walk out of the restricted area. Although I also encountered some alienated beasts on the road, they were quickly resolved by these scavengers. Under Su Qing's observation, she had a judgment in her heart. He felt that if he made a move, among the 6 scavengers, except for the old man known as the Thunder Team, everyone else could fight against them. They are not monks, but their ruthlessness and timing, as well as their attitude of not caring about death at that critical moment, make them more lethal. Su Qing analyzed from the bottom of his heart. He thought that apart from Lei Team, everyone else alone could fight by himself. If there are 2, it is not impossible for me, but if there are 3 together, I am afraid that I will not be able to. With this judgment, Su Qing became more cautious. At the same time, he was keenly aware that as they got closer and closer to the outside world, the expressions of those scavengers became much more relaxed. They even joked and laughed with each other on the road. Only the old man called Thunder Team didn't say anything along the way. Others were also in awe of him, which made Su Qing curious about the identity of the old man. However, this curiosity did not reduce his vigilance. Even though he was about to leave the restricted area now, Su Qing's vigilance was still the same. When following these scavengers, he did not get close enough. Instead, they were not far behind, listening to their conversations while accompanying them cautiously. Until the sky was about to completely fall, with a warm feeling coming towards his face, Su Qing paused, looked back at the wasteland behind him, and then looked at the world ahead. Between heaven and earth, there seems to be an invisible boundary where he is. Within the boundaries, it is a forbidden area of early formation, which is cold and cold. Beyond the boundaries, is the normal world, the earth rejuvenates. They walked out of the restricted area. Although it is dark outside, the starry sky is bright and you can see the bright moon hanging high. Although the earth is also desolate, it is far from the gloomy and coldness of the forbidden area, and sometimes some normal sounds of birds and beasts can be heard. In the grass in the distance, Su Qing even saw a rabbit, watching them vigilantly. All this made Su Qing look a little dazed. Those scavengers also looked completely relaxed, and even Thunder Team eased their brows. I finally came out. This time it went smoothly. Whenever possible, I don't want to take another half step in the restricted area. Don't go to the restricted area. If you want to survive in this ghost world, if you want to live better, you must go to the restricted area and work hard. Sooner or later, I will buy a residence right in the city of 7 Blood Eyes. Outside the restricted area, these scavengers were obviously in a soothing mood, and they spoke to each other. Su Qing was silent, but he listened carefully. He listened to the conversations of these people along the way, and had already learned a lot of information that he had not been able to access before. For example, the 7 Blood Eyes, he has heard these scavengers mention it many times, and it seems that it is a very powerful force. There is also the name Zato, which has also been mentioned several times by them. Do you have this ambition? 7 Blood Eyes is divided into many cities, and the Antler city next to it is one of them, but the qualifications there are not just enough to buy if you have enough spirit coins. You also need the recommendation of 7 Blood Eyes disciples. What is the right of residence? My goal is to obtain the entry qualification of Kixutong and become a disciple of Kixutong. You went to Kixutong, and you won't survive for 3 days. Who can't blow it? Why don't you say that your goal is to go overseas to look at the ancient continent, where there is still the origin of the human race? When Su Qing heard this, his heart moved. He had seen the name Wanggu on a bamboo slip. Wanggu? If Laozi has the ability to ignore those taboos in the sea, do you think I won't go? The two of the scavengers seemed to have some verbal conflict with each other, and they fought each other. Su Qing pricked up his ears, and was about to continue listening to their conversation to get information. The old man of the Thunder team on the side glanced at the two, and spoke for the first time along the way. It's not impossible to visit the ancient continent. There are 4 methods. You can think about which one is suitable for you. 1. Build a foundation within the age of 15 and become a rare talent. 2. Pay 300,000 June spirit coins and buy migration places from Zitu, Qixutong, or Litajiao. 3rd, he has made outstanding contributions to the human race in alchemy. 4th, he has been accepted as a direct disciple by several major families of Zitu, several peak masters of Qixutong, or the leader of Lichuo sect. Oh, there is a 5th method, to become a treasurer. Think about it, which one is suitable? The scavengers fell silent one after another, especially when they heard the 5th method. They all looked unnatural and showed fear in their eyes. Su Qing's eyes narrowed too. He had heard the name of the treasurer. When he was in the slum, he once had a few familiar companions who were taken away by some luxuriously dressed people. It is said that the purpose of training is to become a treasurer. At that time, other children in the slum were still envious. So he hesitated for a while, looked at the old man of Thunder team, and asked softly, "Excuse me, what is a treasurer?" The old man of Lei team's eyes fell on Su Qing, and he spoke calmly. Use one's own body to nurture magical treasures, practice special exercises, rely on flesh and blood to dilute the heterogeneous pollution of magical treasures, so that the increase in the heterogeneity caused by each use of magical treasures is alleviated so that it can be used continuously, while oneself gradually withered. Dead man. Su Qing's eyes narrowed, unable to speak for a long time, she fell silent. Everyone seems to have lost their interest in talking because of the 3 words, treasure keeper, and walked silently in the dark night. Until they left the restricted area some distance, on a plain, the Thunder team chose to camp. Different from the restricted area, in addition to the tent itself, the outside camp also has a lit bonfire. With the burning of the flames, the warmth around them became stronger. These scavengers also sat around the bonfire and took out their food to bake, which gradually filled the aroma. Looking at their food, Su Qing swallowed, sat in the distance, took out half of the hard jerky from the leather bag, and bit it hard in his mouth. Team Lei, who was beside the bonfire, swept his gaze, got up and walked over to Su Qing. As Su Qing suddenly raised his head, Lei Dui threw a leather bag with a few hot steamed buns in it. The moment he saw the steamed bun, Su Qing's eyes straightened, resisting the urge and speaking in a low voice. Thanks. Lei Dui did not speak, and returned to the bonfire, surrounded by scavengers laughing and speaking. Lei team, why are you being so nice to this kid? They're all poor people, and it's fate to meet them. If you can help, help. There are 3 steamed buns, which are very hot in hand. Su Qing hesitated for a while and saw that everyone by the fire was eating the same steamed buns, so he pretended to take a bite and observed the scavengers. After a long while and found that they were still as usual, he endured for a long time before he really took a small bite. Waited for a moment in his mouth. After confirming that it was fine, I slowly chewed until it was broken and swallowed slowly. After waiting for a long time, after confirming that there was no problem, he breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He couldn't bear it any longer, and ate the whole thing in a big mouthful. Then he hesitated for a while, and then ate the second one in small bites. Although he was still hungry, he still wrapped the last steamed bun and carefully placed it in his leather bag, like a treasure. Soon it was getting late, and the scavengers also returned to the tent one after another. Like yesterday, the Thunder team handed him the sleeping bag and said a word before leaving. Send it to you. Su Qing raised her head, looked at Team Lei, and suddenly spoke. Why? Why? 3 steamed buns, a sleeping bag. There is no reason. If you are willing, you can also get me something to eat in the future. Lei Dui turned around and walked towards the tent. What do you like to eat? Me. Lei Dui thought while standing beside the tent. Snake, that thing tastes good. After speaking, he walked into the tent. Su Qing held the sleeping bag and looked at Lei Team's tent for a long time, nodded heavily, got into the sleeping bag and closed his eyes. But instead of falling asleep immediately, he silently ran the sea mountain technique with his eyes closed, which had become his habit. Even though it was extremely cold when he practiced, he did not give up at all, and seized all the time to practice hard. Especially today, what Thunder Team said about building a foundation before the age of 15, although he didn't compare it with the kind of genius in his words, he still had some ideas in his heart. I'm 14 this year. Su Qing murmured, continuing to practice. Just like that, time passed slowly, and soon 5 days passed. Su Qing followed these scavengers, over the mountains and across the grasslands. There were 3 people who left halfway along the way, which also confirmed Su Qing's previous judgment that they were temporarily grouped together. On the 7th day, after the 2 scavengers with knives also left, only Su Qing and Lei Dui were left. That night, at the foot of a mountain, beside the bonfire, the old man of Lei Team watched as he finished eating the steamed buns, and then slowly opened his mouth to Su Qing, which he had carefully put away. Child, at noon tomorrow, we can reach our destination. That's where I live. It's a camp where scavengers gather. Su Qing raised her head and looked at the old man. www.mtlnovel.com. The old man looked into the distance and continued to speak. The scavengers' camps are often built beside the restricted area, so the camp on the other side of the mountain is also a restricted area. Compared to the Chukhung forbidden area where you were before, it has existed for a long time. Not only are there beasts, but also dangerous places, and the heterogeneity is extremely dense. If ordinary people go in for a day and don't come out, they will surely die, even if it is me, and it can last up to 7 days inside. But there is a lot of horse chestnut, which is a must for refining baidan. Baidan is the basic pill that monks use to resolve their own heterogeneity, so many outsiders come here on weekdays. They cherish their lives, and they are not familiar with geography. Pick. When the old man said this, he looked at Su Qing. Do you understand what I mean? You mean, the local scavengers in the camp are all outlaws. For money, they can do anything. After Su Qing heard about Baidan and its effects, she narrowed her eyes and said softly after thinking. The old man of Thunder Team smiled with surprise in his eyes. Part of your answer is correct. What I want to tell you is that in the scavengers' camp, the rule is that the weak eat the strong, and strength comes first. But at least it is also a place to live, and there is a market, a place to buy and sell necessities of life, and even a caravan from time to time, so each of the houses in it has a lot of value. That's why it's not just anyone who wants to enter. Every freshman who wants to get the right to stay has to go through a beast training. This is the rule set by the camp owner. And you, if you pass it successfully, I can allow you to live with me for a fee. The old man looked at Su Qing and spoke slowly. Nanhuang continent is very large. If you look at it from a high altitude, you can see the shape of its plate, which is an irregular oval, surrounded by the sea. Although it is far from Huanggu continent, separated by the endless sea, it is more like an island land, but the scope is so vast that many people can't finish it in a lifetime. It's just that most of the places in it are difficult for the human race to step into, and they are blocked by the Truth Mountain range that runs through the entire Nanhuang continent. The southwest of the Truth Mountain range is an extremely vast restricted area. It occupies nearly 70% of the area of Nanhuang continent, and only the northeastern area of the Truth Mountain Range is the place where the human race lives. Even so, there are not many human races. In this northeastern region, there are numerous large and small cities, some solid, some simple. However, the places where these cities were built avoided the small restricted areas in the northeast region. When there is a choice, no one wants to live around the restricted area. Living in a crisis where danger will come at that moment, only the desperados will be forced to gather together in a last resort, readied, licked. Struggling to survive. Thus, scavenger camps were formed, and there were such camps around almost every restricted area. Looking at the entire human race area, the number of scavenger camps was very mixed. Standing on the top of the mountain at this moment, what caught Su Qing's eyes was such a camp. From a distance, the camp is not very big, and it looks like there are hundreds of people living in it. Perhaps it was because of the early morning, the smoke from the cooking was not as prosperous as the city, but it was still very lively. There were faint shouts, curses, hawking, and unbridled laughter, intertwined and spread far away. It's just a valuable house in the words of the Thunder team. From the inside out, the structure is simpler and simpler, and the outermost part is basically just a tent. As for not far behind the camp, there is a dark jungle. The mist was shrouded there, as if a terrifying existence was hidden. Even if the sky is full of sunlight, it cannot fully reflect it. If there are gods and demons in it, the indifference will shock all directions. It is also like the black alienation point on the human body, which is shocking and distinct from other areas. How do you feel when you see it? On the top of the mountain, Team Thunder said. It's almost like a slum. Su Qing thought about it and answered truthfully. Team Lei smiled, didn't speak, and walked forward. Su Qing withdrew his gaze and followed Lei team. The two went all the way down the mountain, getting closer and closer to the camp. On the way, I also met people who came back from outings in 2s and 3s. They were all dressed in similar clothes, mostly dark grey leather jackets. Su Qing noticed that when these people saw Lei team, they all showed awe in their expressions, and most of their eyes swept towards him with curiosity. This made Su Qing have more guesses about Team Lei's identity. In this way, when the sun was 3 poles, Su Qing followed the Lei team into the plain below the mountain and into the camp of the scavengers. There is no city wall in the camp, and the ground is very messy, dusty, with dead leaves and garbage everywhere, and it feels a little smoky. And as he came, the sound he heard on the mountain before came into Su Qing's ears more clearly. In addition to the simple buildings, there are also many scavengers. Some are tall, burly, and arrogant like oxen, some are skinny and sinister, and some are so old that they can't open their eyes, but no one dares to provoke them. There are also some young people like him, huddled in the corner, staring at the sky. Some of them are disabled. There are many people in here. Su Qing closed his eyes slightly after seeing it. The breath of those people made him feel the fluctuation of spiritual energy. All kinds of people, some are buying and selling, some are fighting with each other, and some are lying on the boulder and basking in the sun. Some of them walked out of the tents with bright feathers hanging with their trousers, and their faces showed lewdness. Su Qing walked into the camp with the Thunder team, and to outsiders, it seemed like he had entered hell. But apart from his inner vigilance, there is nothing unusual about him, and he even has some vaguely familiar feelings. It's really similar to a slum. Su Qing murmured in his heart, and glanced at the tents with feathers, and saw a figure with white flowers inside. Even inside a tent, a young woman in sloppy clothes walked out, with laziness, smiled and waved to Su Qing. Don't look around. Lei Dui glanced at Su Qing. I know where it is. Su Qing looked back and replied. The wrinkles on Lei Dui's face piled up with a dumb smile, and without saying anything, he took Su Qing through the camp until he reached his destination. It was a huge wooden building in the center of the camp, in a ring shape, like a coliseum. Su Qing was observing along the way, and he had already constructed most of the map of this camp in his mind. This is his habit. In many cases, familiarity with the environment can often change the situation of a crisis. At this moment, he looked up at the Colosseum-like building in front of him, and noticed that in addition to the huge field, there were many simple benches inside. In addition to this, there were also the roars of fierce beasts, which came from inside the building. There are also some wooden shed-like row houses around, and there are a few scavengers who are clearly dressed in cleaner clothes talking and laughing outside the row houses. With the arrival of Thunder Team, a thin middle-aged man walked out of the Colosseum very quickly. This person was wearing a long gown different from that of a scavenger, with a three-way beard on his face, and he also had chinic energy fluctuations on his body. A newcomer. The rules are already known. Thunder Team spoke slowly. What's your name? Sanbahu asked casually. A little brat, if you have any name, just call it a child. Lady Ui said lightly. Then come with me, kid, you are lucky, there are already a few ahead of you, and the game will start almost tomorrow. San Kuei, who let out a breath, turned and walked towards the row house. Su Qing glanced at Team Thunder. Go, I'll pick you up tomorrow. Lady Ui looked at Su Qing with some expectations in his eyes. Su Qing gave Lady Ui a deep look, nodded, didn't speak, and walked behind San Kuei Hu. Until they got to the row house, the three-legged Hu explained a few words to the scavenger beside him, then turned and left. And Su Qing was also placed in the row house and told that she was not allowed to go out without permission. The moment he stepped into this row of houses, Su Qing saw 4 pairs of eyes in different positions in the house, converging on him. It was 3 young men of his age and a young man, 3 men and 1 woman. The 2 youngsters seemed to be a few years older than him. As for that girl, she was a little younger than Su Qing, huddled in a corner, with a huge scar on her face. She watched everything around her nervously and vigilantly, including the original 3 people and the newcomer Su Qing. As for the eldest young man here, it seems that he was originally a scavenger, but now he just changed his camp. So after seeing Su Qing, the corner of his mouth twitched, a little disapproving, he turned his eyes away, aggressively, stared at the girl in the corner, and licked his lips. But obviously he, who has not officially obtained the right to live in the camp, does not dare to be presumptuous now. Su Qing ignored them, found a place by the door, crossed her knees, closed her eyes, and meditated silently. Time passed slowly, perhaps because Su Qing's arrival was too quiet. Gradually the 3 people in the row house, except the little girl, ignored her and started talking to each other. In the words of the 2 teenagers, it was obvious that they wanted to please the youth. Most of the content discussed is related to this trial. Through their conversations, Su Qing knew that the camp would hold a trial every once in a while when enough people who wanted to obtain residency qualifications had accumulated. The rules of the trial are simple. Because the owner of this camp has kept many mutant beasts in captivity, the trial to obtain the residence qualification is to draw lots in public and fight against the beasts that have been drawn. Live or die, each other's prey. The survivors can take away the spoils and obtain residency qualifications. For the deceased, everything in himself will become food for the beasts. And every trial will be held in this Colosseum. At that time, the scavengers in the camp will buy tickets to watch this scene. While getting pleasure from it, the camp owner will also make a bet to make a profit. In this cruel world, human life is very worthless. However, if you are not qualified to enter the city and cannot enter the camp, and live alone in the wild, the risk of death will be even greater. Of course, slums are also an option, but obviously those who can decide to enter the scavenger camp have their own stories of having to come here. Su Qing listened while meditating. Until they were talking, when they talked about the opening of the god's eyes many days ago, a young man suddenly opened his mouth. When I came, I heard that you were the survivor of that catastrophe. As soon as these words came out, Su Qing slowly opened his eyes. When he looked, he noticed that the object of the boy's words was not himself, but the little girl in the corner. The little girl trembled and nodded silently. Su Qing's eyes fell on the little girl. Everyone else has heard of it, and he has experienced all this, so he deeply knows that the people who can survive the catastrophe and come here may not be as fragile and simple as the eyes see. She also seemed to notice Su Qing's gaze, and the little girl raised her head to look at Su Qing. Su Qing closed his eyes again and continued to meditate. He wanted to spend all the time to cultivate. This was the foundation of his life. Just like that, the night passed. The next morning www.mtlnovel.com. With the chaos and clamor of the outside world, the door of the townhouse was suddenly pushed open from the outside. The sun shone in and covered the body of the scavenger standing at the door. His shadow fell into the house, and when the figure of the little girl in the corner was shrouded, there was a cold voice. "Pack up and follow me, it's time for your good show. It's finally time to wait." The young man in the house, who seemed to be a scavenger, was the first to get up, walked over with a smile, and said hello to the person at the door. The two teenagers followed quickly. Su Qing was the fourth one to walk out, and the little girl was the last one. The scavenger at the door seemed to know the young man. After laughing and cursing a few words, he ignored the others and walked towards the Colosseum with the young man. As they approached, the noises, clamors, and shouts grew louder and louder one after another. Until the group of them stepped into the Colosseum, the sound around them suddenly burst out. It can be seen that there are more than 100 people on the benches around the Colosseum at this moment. There are men and women, as if surrounded by a group of demons, watching a good show together. Their voices were loud, the little girl trembled obviously, and the two teenagers were also pale. Only the young man looked at the audience with excitement in his eyes. Then there was Su Qing. His expression did not change much, and he began to observe the environment in the fighting area in the Colosseum. The range is not very large, it is not suitable for pulling, there is no cover, and it is not suitable for dodging. The surrounding wooden planks are very high, which is not suitable for drawing danger to the viewing table, but there are several door marks. It seems that there are other passages. So, or you can delay and use the shouts of those scavengers to scare the beasts and find an opportunity to take action, but it may also cause the beasts to rage, then it is most beneficial to have a quick solution. When Su Qing was observing the environment of the fighting area, with the clamor from the surrounding audience, in the Colosseum, at the gate where Su Qing and his party had just walked, a huge wooden door fell with a bang. It hit the ground heavily, sending up dust. This sound, like the sound of a horn, made the scavengers around him even more excited. Su Qing even noticed that on the top platform directly in front, there was a middle-aged man in a brocade robe, who was accompanied by a group of people and sat at the top. Because of the distance, the appearance is a little blurry. But obviously this person's identity is not ordinary. With such a long distance, Su Qing could feel the psychic energy fluctuations in the opponent's body are extremely strong, exceeding everything he has ever seen. While this made Su Qing vigilant, he also had speculation in his heart that this person was most likely the owner of this camp. Because by the other's side, Su Qing saw yesterday's three-legged Hu Zheng squatting, as if he was reporting carefully. And as the camp owner took his seat, the Sankoahu stood on the high platform and made a gesture towards the bottom. Soon, on the edge of the Colosseum, another wooden door opened, and the roars of fierce beasts were heard more clearly without the obstruction of the wooden door. Along with the voice came a group of scavengers. They were divided into 4 teams of 3, each carrying a huge iron cage, and walked out slowly. Inside the iron cage, the vicious beast roared and jumped around, as if to tear apart the cage. Su Qing looked quickly and swept over the 4 iron cages. I saw 2 giant wolves inside, one big and one small, but they all had sharp teeth, their bodies were pitch black, and their eyes were bloodshot. There was a lot of saliva from under the corner of his mouth. When he looked at Su Qing and the others, they all showed a ferocious meaning. There is also a red bear with red hair, with thick arms that exceed the thighs of adults, his expression is full of irritability, and he constantly shakes the iron cage. The 3 scavengers who carried it were all struggling. As for the beast in the last iron cage, it was obviously a lot weaker. It was a gibbon. The whole body was covered with pustules, and it seemed that it would burst open when touched, especially it seemed to be very painful. Their appearance made the surrounding audience boil again. The faces of the 2 teenagers beside Su Qing were instantly pale, and the little girl was also very frightened. Even the young man who was a scavenger was obviously nervous at the moment. Why are there 4? Su Qing was surprised and looked at the open wooden door passage. Just as he looked, the 4 roaring and struggling beasts suddenly quieted down, as if they were shocked. At the same time, a huge iron cage nearly twice the size of the cage they were in was slowly carried out from the wooden door by 6 scavengers. With the appearance of the iron cage, people around the audience suddenly exclaimed, "Giant horned python!" This time, the camp owner actually got a giant horned python, but it's also, in the eyes of the camp owner, this thing is not very valuable. For these little brats, whoever gets this thing will die. Even if we encounter it in the wild, it will take 2 people to kill it hard. The vicious beast that existed in the iron cage was a huge python. The thickness of his body is comparable to that of an adult's waist. His whole body is grey and black with dark lines. If you look closely, the dark lines seem to depict horn-like peaks. It was coiled motionless in the cage, its huge head was slightly raised, and its yellow vertical pupils were cold and looked towards the outside world. Under its gaze, both the giant wolf and the gibbon were trembling. Only the red bear let out a low growl when it was stimulated. It looked like a confrontation, but in fact its body was slowly retreating until it retreated to the edge of the cage. "Don't take it, don't take it!" Behind Su Qing, the 2 teenagers were trembling at the moment, and while they were praying in low voices, there was a glint in Su Qing's eyes. He knew this giant horned python. When he was in the slum, he saw the python corpse brought back by someone hunting this python in the city. At that time, I also heard from people with rich experience around me that this python is very powerful. Once it is entangled by it, the giant tree will be broken by it, and the skin of the python is very thick. But the body is clumsy and the speed is relatively slow. And its gallbladder has good medicinal properties, which can resolve the pollution of the body to a certain extent, and the snake meat is also very nourishing. Thinking of this, Su Qing came to mind that Lei Dui once said that he likes to eat snakes. As for snakes, he caught quite a few when he was a child, so he licked his lips. In addition, the alienation point on his body became darker and darker as he practiced, and he felt a faint tingling sensation when he practiced yesterday. Su Qing pondered that if he could eat the guts of this python, he would be able to resolve a lot. As he stared at the giant horned python, the lottery began. As the scavengers arranged by Sanbahu came over with 5 bamboo sticks, each bamboo stick was marked with the name of the beast to fight with. The young man stepped forward to draw first. After seeing what he was drawing, he was obviously relieved. Then came the 2 boys and the little girl. After the first 2 took out the bamboo sticks in their prayers, their expressions were a little bitter, but the little girl looked at the bamboo sticks in her hands, but her eyes showed despair. It was the giant horned python that she drew, and the last bamboo stick left was the little wolf, which was obviously the weakest among the 5 beasts. Su Qing held the bamboo stick, frowned slightly, and pondered. Soon, after the scavengers retreated, the trialists were also arranged in the corner to simply stop them. Amid the cheers of the surrounding spectators, the first trial began. The one who arranged to appear was one of the 2 teenagers. He shivered and walked out. The fierce beast that fought against him was the stout red bear. The process of fighting was very fast. The boy was no match for the red bear at all. After struggling to fight a few times, he was knocked down by the red bear. In desperation, his body was directly torn apart. Blood splattered everywhere, ushered in the boiling around, accompanied by remorseful abuse. This scene made the other boy's body tremble, and he, who was supposed to be the second player, suddenly shouted that he wanted to give up the trial. So in the booze, Su Qing watched the young man being taken away by the scavengers, but he didn't know what happened. The third is the young man who was a scavenger. He drew the bigger black wolf. His experience as a scavenger made him more ruthless than ordinary people. After a thrilling life-and-death struggle, he beheaded the wolf with his injuries and breathless, becoming the first successful person in this trial. The door opened, he clutched his chest and left freely. The fourth is a little girl. When the iron prison that locked the giant horned python was opened, the little girl gritted her teeth tremblingly, and in despair she was about to walk past Su Qing to fight. But at this moment, Su Qing suddenly spoke. "Let's change it." The little girl was stunned for a moment. Before she could react, Su Qing had already replaced her bamboo stick with her. After taking away the bamboo stick engraved with the giant horned python, he ignored the grateful gaze of the little girl and walked towards the giant horned python. As they entered, the scavengers who were watching around, obviously saw the order before, and now they all started booing. But apart from the people who bet on him and the little girl, others won't care about this kind of thing. They won't, and neither will the camp owner. Everything is self-inflicted. Inside the Colosseum, Su Qing walked calmly towards the iron cage, and the giant horned python inside looked at Su Qing gloomily and slowly climbed out. When the stout body protruded out of the iron cage, the scales slid across the iron rod of the cage, making bursts of harsh rubbing noises. The animal's instinct made it aware that the young man in front of him was a little different from the prey it usually encountered. So after climbing out, the giant horned python did not attack immediately, but coiled up outside the iron cage, with its head held high, and with vigilance, it stared at Su Qing who was constantly approaching. This scene aroused the interest of the surrounding audience, and the roar was less. Su Qing looked as usual, approaching step by step. Maybe he entered the attack range of the giant horned python, or maybe he was stimulated by his breath. The coldness in the yellow pupils of the giant horned python was instantly strong, and the tail slammed on the ground. As soon as the ground was knocked, there was a roaring sound. In this sound, his body rushed out violently, his mouth opened wide in midair, sharp teeth were exposed, and an unpleasant stench was exuded, and he roared towards Su Qing, wanting to devour him. Su Qing narrowed his eyes and looked coldly at the giant horned python that was approaching rapidly. The moment the other party approached, he flicked his body to avoid him. He did not choose to take advantage of the opportunity, let alone the giant python head that was passing by. With sharp eyes in his eyes, like a hunter, he closely observed the belly of this python. Under his observation, the giant horned python flew into the air and let out a low roar, twisting its body, and suddenly its tail slammed behind it, making a harsh whistling sound, and fiercely drawing towards Su Qing. The hunting instinct made the giant horned python's head turn forcibly at this moment, and the tail was one after the other, like a circle to be connected, and it went straight to Su Qing, as if to entangle him. Su Qing was silent, his eyes still watching the belly of the giant horned python, until the tail of the snake approached. His right hand suddenly clenched a fist, and the moment the tail drew, he punched it. Boom! Although the practice of Haishanju is only one layer, it can bring Su Qing's physical blessing, which is still not small. At this moment, the tail of the snake is bombarded, and it is directly rolled back, so that the head and tail cannot be connected, and the giant horned python is obviously painful, but it is not fatal. The pain of the wound made it fierce, with red eyes, the head slammed hard, and it bit towards Su Qing. But Su Qing's eyes narrowed, and there was a gleam of light. He finally found the place he was looking for. At this moment, his body moved forward, not retreating, but advancing, directly approaching the upper middle area of the giant horned python's body. The right hand clenched a fist and punched it hard, 1 punch, 2 punches, 3 punches. Boxing bombardment. The impact from Su Qing made the giant horned python keep retreating, its roar became stronger, trying to wrap Su Qing around, but the power contained in Su Qing's fist made it difficult to touch its head and tail. As for the bombarded abdomen, due to the relatively weak scales, after a few punches, Su Qing was beaten to some extent by Su Qing, blood oozing out, and its toughness was damaged. Seeing this, before the giant horned python could change its shape, Su Qing's eyes flashed coldly. With his left hand, he immediately pulled out the dagger tied to his calf, and in the cold glow of the dagger, it pierced directly into the flesh and blood of the giant horned python with incomparable speed. He broke in an instant, and slammed into it fiercely. Blood splattered everywhere, and in the shrill hissing sound of the giant horned python, a shocking wound was opened in its abdomen, revealing the snake gall in its cavity. This snake is very big, but it is obviously mutated. The snake's guts are small, like an egg. Without any hesitation, Su Qing raised his right hand to go deep into the cavity, grabbed the gallbladder and tugged it hard, and with the shrill roar of the giant horned python, he took out its gallbladder. The blood was sprayed, and the sand was sprinkled. Ignoring these bloodstains, Su Qing held the snake gallbladder, and with a strange look in his eyes, in front of the surrounding scavengers with different expressions, he put it in his mouth and swallowed it in one bite. While swallowing peacefully, the giant horned python, which was taken from its guts, struggled frantically in pain, roared mournfully, and slapped the ground hard with its body to kick up dust, as if it wanted to vent its severe pain. The head slammed into Su Qing even more violently. The red eyes showed madness, and the mouth opened to the extreme, as if to completely swallow Su Qing. Su Qing looked at him coldly, and at the moment when the opponent approached, his body suddenly jumped up, and after avoiding the head that hit him again, he waved his right hand in midair, and a black iron sign appeared immediately. As he lowered his head, murderous intent flashed in his eyes, and his body sank heavily downwards. With the help of his strength, speed, and weight, the impact of the iron stick reached the extreme, and he stabbed it along the snake's heart area. Broken the scales of the snake, like a broken bamboo, pierced with one blow. With a bang, the giant horned python trembled violently throughout its body, as if it had no strength to support its body. After a while, as the dust dissipated, the scavengers who were watching the battle were all surprised. Many people stood up and looked solemnly at the young man in the Colosseum who was pulling the iron stick from the snake corpse at the moment. If adults were beheading giant horned pythons like this, they wouldn't let them look like this. But a small and thin child who seemed to be thin, could swallow the guts of a living snake so neatly and beheaded with another blow, and his expression was indifferent, and there was no change from the beginning to the end. This is extremely rare in the camp. The little wolf and the red bear in the cage on the side were obviously frightened, and they were shivering there at the moment. www.mtlnovel.com. This seems to be not a trial, but a hunt. Under the gazes of everyone around him, the young man put the iron stick in place, clasped the wound of the giant horned python with one hand, and walked towards the gate of the Colosseum. Behind him, the blood from the giant horned python was dragged out by a red line, shocking. Next to the gate, the giant gate hadn't opened yet. Su Qing looked back at the high platform. After a while, the three-legged who on the high platform reacted, and with some lingering fears, he immediately made a gesture, and soon, the door opened with a roar. Leaning out the door, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, the long-awaited Thunder Team. He smiled and looked at Su Qing. "Can I live with you?" Su Qing dragged the snake corpse and looked up at the Thunder Team. "Yes." Lei Dui laughed. Su Qing nodded and threw the snake corpse in his hand. "You like to eat snakes, please eat this." Team Lei was stunned for a moment, then laughed loudly, took the corpse of the giant horned python, and in this laughter, with Su Qing, gradually walked away. It wasn't until they were far away that there was a boiling uproar in the Colosseum. In the midst of this uproar, in the corner of the crowd, there was an old man in a purple robe, and beside him was a middle-aged man with an expressionless face like a servant. The middle-aged man's eyebrows had a 5-point star totem. They were sitting there, obviously no matter their clothes or bearing, they were out of tune with the surrounding environment, but no one seemed to be able to see their existence. Even the camp owner didn't see them in his eyes. The old man's face was ruddy, and there was thunder in his eyes, as if it could destroy everything if it were scattered outside. This boy, interesting.